The morning began the same way it always did, in the quiet half-light of Seattle, where the sky still wore its veil of gray. Before the sun found the courage to rise, the cafe on Pine Street opened at exactly 6:04 in the morning, a time chosen by the owner because she said 4 was her lucky number and she believed it kept her business alive during hard seasons. For most people, the hour was too early, almost unreal. But for Elias Ward, it was right on time. He liked the quiet hour before the world fully woke up, because it gave him room to breathe without feeling watched or recognized or pitied. He stepped inside that morning, carrying the faint scent of cold air on his black coat, and moved toward the far corner of the cafe, the one with the window fogged by the mix of warm indoor heat and the chilly wind outside. The barista barely looked up when he entered because he was part of the place, now a familiar presence who came in order to help instead of ordering anything for himself. But today, he did not walk straight to the counter. Today he paused because she was there again. Curled up in the same corner chair, hunched inside a jacket so thin it looked more like a memory than clothing, was the young woman he had been quietly helping for weeks. Her name, or at least the name he had given her inside his mind, was the Quiet Girl, though he did not know what her real name was, and she never volunteered it. She slept with her head on the table, her breathing shallow, the strands of her tangled brown hair spread like dark ribbons across the wood. Her clothes were soaked from the rain, and her hands trembled even in sleep, as if her bones remembered something her mind could not escape. He could see how pale she was, the way her lips were slightly cracked, and the shadows under her eyes made her look like she had not slept in days. He carried 2 cups of coffee in his hands, both identical medium roast, no sugar, a small ritual he had never explained to anyone and never intended to. The cups let out white curls of steam that rose in soft spirals, disappearing into the cold air around him. He set 1 cup down gently in front of her, the way he always did, and then placed the second cup across from it the way he always had for years, even before she arrived in his life. He adjusted the cup slightly because he wanted it to sit perfectly centered, and then he paused, staring at his own hand because he had not meant to care that much. He reached into his coat pocket, took out a folded piece of fabric, and draped it across her shoulders. A soft gray scarf he kept for mornings exactly like this, when her hands would not stop shaking and he did not know how else to help her. His motion was gentle and so careful he might have been dressing a wounded bird he feared would fly away if he breathed too loudly. The woman stirred. A tremor ran through her body, and her eyelids lifted, showing eyes that were tired and frightened, yet strangely clear like the sky after a storm. She blinked slowly, taking a moment to process her surroundings. The warmth of the scarf, the scent of the coffee, and the presence of the man standing beside her. She looked at him with a strange mixture of confusion, recognition, and something deeper, something he could not name. And then she spoke. Her voice was hoarse but steady, and it carried the weight of someone who had lived too many lifetimes inside too few years. Would you still save someone, even if you failed once? The question cut through the quiet cafe, sharper than any sound that morning. Elias froze because the words did not feel random. They felt like an arrow shot clean through his chest from a place he had buried so deep he prayed no one would ever find it again. He felt his heartbeat stumble its rhythm, breaking like a bird hitting glass. His fingers tightened around the second cup of coffee, and the thin paper cup cracked slightly, under the pressure creating a faint snapping sound that echoed far too loudly in the silence. A thin fracture line ran down the side of the cup, a fragile, imperfect seam that immediately filled with hot liquid threatening to spill. For a moment, neither of them moved. Mara watched him with wide, cautious eyes, and he watched her with the expression of a man standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure if he was about to fall or jump. He did not answer because he could not. His throat closed, and suddenly the room around him tilted, as if the walls had shifted an inch to the left. Her question was supposed to be simple, but it was not. Not for him. Not after everything he had lost. Not after everything he could not forgive himself for. The cafe continued its gentle quiet, the hum of the refrigerator, the low drip from the espresso machine, the distant sound of footsteps on wet pavement outside. But inside Elias something cracked wide open like the cup in his hand. He looked down at it, and the symbolism struck him with a violence he did not expect. The fracture in the cup looked exactly like the fracture in him carved years ago, the night he failed the only person he had ever promised to save. The steam from the coffee rose up, weaving into the cold air around them like a ghost slipping past. He swallowed, but it did nothing to loosen the tightness in his chest. Mara sat up straighter, pulling the scarf around herself as if she was not sure she deserved its warmth. Her gaze stayed on him, steady, soft, frighteningly perceptive. She did not repeat her question. She did not explain it. She simply let it sit between them like a secret, waiting for the courage to be spoken aloud. The rain had eased outside, leaving behind a curtain of mist that pressed against the cafe windows, blurring the world into soft gray shapes. Elias felt as if he were standing inside a memory he had tried and failed to outrun. The 2 cups of coffee sat on the table, one steaming bright and full. The other cracked, leaking slightly onto his hand, where he did not seem to notice the heat. 2 cups, always 2 cups, one for the world he lived in, one for the world he lost. He should have walked away. He should have found a polite answer. He should have said anything to break the silence. But the truth was that he could not speak, because for the first time in years, someone had asked him a question that reached straight into the deepest quiet place inside him and pulled out a truth he had spent years burying. Would you still save someone, even if you failed once? He looked at Mara, and for the first time, he realized something. He had not allowed himself to admit since the day everything fell apart. He was afraid to save anyone ever again. The 2 cups of coffee sat between them, their steam rising side by side like 2 breaths in the cold morning air, and something in him shifted painfully yet undeniably, as if the question she asked had turned the key on a door he never wanted to open. Elias Ward did not always wake up before dawn, carrying 2 cups of coffee for a woman he barely knew. There was a time when his mornings belonged to boardrooms and private flights and meetings with people who spoke in polished sentences, lined with profit projections and futures that stretched endlessly across digital horizons. Elias had once been the mind behind Ward Systems, a company valued in the billions, a name whispered in the same breath as innovation and impossible breakthroughs. Reporters called him a prodigy. Investors called him indispensable competitors, called him untouchable, and he remembered it all with the same dull ache, a reminder of a life he had walked away from without ever looking back. At 38, he lived quietly in a modest brick townhouse in Capitol Hill, a place where no one expected anything from him, and no one looked at him long enough to realize he was a man who used to own entire floors of buildings downtown. The only sign of his former life was the security system built into the walls, the kind only someone like him could afford, even after disappearing from public view. He liked the silence, the anonymity, the way people here called him Eli, instead of the billionaire genius who changed the landscape of tech. He liked how the local barista never asked for selfies, and how teenagers at the park saw him as just another man, throwing a football around with his godson. Noah had been 5 when he came into Elias' life, a small boy with curls that never lay flat, and eyes too sad for someone so young. Noah had lost his father in an accident that still twisted Elias' stomach. Whenever he thought about it, because he had been there, he had watched his best friend die, trying to save a stranger, and Elias had never forgiven himself for not doing more. When he signed the guardianship papers and brought Noah home, people in his old world called it admirable, but Elias knew the truth. It was not heroism, it was penance. He had promised Noah father he would look out for the boy if anything ever happened, and the moment that promise became reality, something in Elias broke wide open. He quit Ward Systems 2 months later, sold most of his shares, and vanished from the headlines completely. People speculated for a while, calling it burnout, or a secret scandal, or an early retirement, but the truth was simpler than any rumor. He could not build a world-changing future while he was stuck drowning in a past he could not erase. His townhouse reflected who he became after he disappeared. It had clean lines, empty spaces, untouched corners, and shelves that held only the necessary items. Except for the 2 ceramic mugs in the kitchen. They sat side by side on the far end of the counter, matching mugs with soft blue glaze and a small chip on the rim of the left one. They had belonged to someone who once filled his mornings with laughter, someone who wore oversized sweaters and danced barefoot on the cold wood floors, while teasing him for taking life too seriously. Her name had been Lila, and she had been the girl who made even the gray Seattle sky feel bright. The memory of her still lived inside the house, like a shadow that refused to fade. The mugs were the only things he never put away, even after she took her last breath in a hospital room filled with the kind of silence that crushes a person from the inside. The doctors had said she needed a new heart, and they had been so close to finding a match. But life was cruel and unpredictable, and Elias had been standing right there, holding her hands when the monitors flatlined. The last thing she ever said was, "I want you to keep living, even if I don't." He did not remember how long he stood there numb and helpless, until her fingers slipped out of his. What he did remember was the way the untouched cup of coffee he had brought her that morning sat on the windowsill, still warm, still full, still waiting for her. For months after the funeral, he made 2 cups of coffee, every morning, one for him, one for her, and poured hers down the sink because he did not know what else to do with the promise she left him. The ritual was the only thing that kept him from collapsing into himself. Eventually, he stopped pouring it out. He simply let it sit there until it went cold. Years later, when he first saw Mara curled in that cafe corner, shivering through the early morning chill, something in him recognized the quiet storm inside her, because it looked too much like the quiet storm inside him. She was not Lila. She did not resemble her, not in looks, not in voice, not in anything tangible. But she had the same fragile way of existing in the world, the same manner of shrinking into herself, as if she expected nothing from anyone and believed she deserved even less. It was that look that made him bring her coffee the first time. He told himself it was nothing, not kindness, not responsibility, not emotional gravity. It was just coffee, a practical gesture, a small thing that mattered to no one but him. Except it did matter, and he felt it the first time she lifted her eyes to meet his. She had the gaze of someone who had learned to stay invisible, because visibility meant danger. He recognized it because for years visibility had meant grief. The barista at the cafe assumed Elias came every morning because he liked their blend, but the truth was he came because he needed a routine that grounded him, a routine that made sense in a life he had dismantled piece by piece, helping people in small ways, wiping tables, donating anonymously, covering a stranger's breakfast bill. Those were the things he clung to, because he was terrified of failing anyone the way he had failed before. Each morning after dropping Noah at preschool, he walked into the cafe, bought 2 cups of coffee, one for him and one for the ghost of the life he lost, then set one in front of the quiet girl without asking her to explain herself. It was not charity, it was recognition, pain recognizing pain. But that morning when she opened her eyes and asked him that question, his entire facade cracked. Would you still save someone even if you failed once? He did not know how she knew to ask something like that. Maybe she did not know at all, and yet somehow she had hit the exact place he had spent years burying under ritual and silence. In the kitchen of his townhouse that morning, before seeing her again, he had paused with the 2 mugs in his hands, staring at the chipped rim and wondering why he couldn't throw them away. He considered replacing them with new ones, but something about the old mugs felt like an anchor, holding him to a promise he had not yet understood. He washed them carefully every night, drying them with the same towel he had used for years, treating them with a reverence that bordered on irrational. One mug he used, the other he kept clean, waiting for what he did not know. And now there was Mara, a stranger he did not owe anything to, but whose presence began to shift something inside him, something he had desperately tried not to feel again for years. He sat on the edge of his mattress late into the night, his fingers pressing against his temples, trying to quiet the echo of her question. He thought about the cold look on her face, the way she recognized something in him without knowing who he was, the way she and her shaking hands reminded him of how much he feared being needed again, being depended on again, being asked to save someone again. But he knew one thing with absolute clarity. Despite everything, he wanted to walk into the cafe the next morning. He wanted to answer her question, even if he did not know how. And for the first time in years, he looked at the second mug on the counter, and instead of seeing loss, he saw possibility. Mara Collins had learned long before she met Elias that disappearing was often the safest way to stay alive. The world did not give her lessons gently. It taught her through bruises that never fully faded, and the sound of a locked door behind her when she was too young to understand why certain people were supposed to protect her, but instead taught her fear. She grew up in Tacoma, in a small yellow house that always looked cheerful from the outside, but felt like a storm cloud on the inside. Her father came home only when he felt like it, and her mother had mastered the art of pretending nothing was wrong, even while hiding the purple marks beneath long sleeves. Mara learned early that silence was both a shield and a prison. When she turned 18, she ran. She thought freedom would be a wide open road, a clean start, but freedom was messy and cruel and full of corners she did not know how to survive. She worked as a waitress first, then a hospital clerk, then finally as a nursing assistant on the night shift. She liked the night shift because fewer people meant fewer eyes watching her, fewer chances to flinch. At the hospital, she found tiny pieces of purpose, holding elderly hands when they trembled, cleaning wounds with gentle patience, carrying tea to patients who had no visitors. She felt safe there, safe in the way a person can feel when they know exactly what someone else needs. She became the kind of assistant patients asked for by name, the one who moved softly and spoke softly and always made people feel seen even for a moment. But life had a way of falling apart the moment she started believing it could be good. Her landlord raised the rent, her hours were cut, her mother called from out of nowhere needing help again, crying, asking her to come home. Mara went hoping this time would be different, but it wasn't. It only took one night, one argument, one familiar explosion of rage for every bone in her body to remember why she had run in the first place. She left in a hurry with only a backpack and her hospital badge still clipped to her jacket. She planned to return the next morning to pick up the rest of her things, but when she came back, the lock had been changed and her belongings were gone. She slept in her car that night. The next night, she did not have the car anymore. A towing company took it because she owed fines she didn't know existed. She tried calling out sick at work, but missed too many shifts. They let her go with a regretful but firm statement that policies were policies and attendance mattered. She had no home, no job, and no one to call. She drifted between shelters, listening to women talk about stories too similar to hers, and she realized how many people disappeared long before they vanished from the world. And yet, through all the chaos, she carried one thing always: a small brown notebook bound with a fraying elastic band. On the first page, she had written in shaky handwriting the book of small kindnesses. Every time someone did something good for her, no matter how tiny, she wrote it down. A bus driver who let her ride for free. A doctor who gave her extra food at the clinic. A stranger who smiled at her when she felt invisible. And then there was the first time she saw him. The man with 2 coffees. She had been sitting in the cafe, trying to warm her hands around a paper cup of water, because she could not afford anything else. She remembered how exhausted she felt, how her head ached, and how the rain soaked into every layer of her clothing. Then she saw a cup of real coffee sliding gently across the table toward her, and a man placing it in front of her without demanding anything. Not her name, not her story, not her gratitude. She had looked up and found his eyes calm, steady, a kind of quiet strength she did not know how to accept. He did not speak. He just placed the second coffee across from hers before walking away. She watched him sit on the opposite side of the cafe, alone with 2 cups. She wondered if the second one was for her, or for someone he lost, or for someone he wished he could still speak to. She wrote him into her notebook that night, entry 17, the gentleman with 2 coffees. She came back the next day because something about that moment felt like a miracle ritual, a small reminder that the world was not entirely cruel. She sat in the same seat, and he brought the same coffee, and then left without forcing conversation. It became their unspoken pattern, their quiet connection, their silent understanding. He never asked why she always shook when someone walked behind her, or why she only ate half of the toast he sometimes left for her. She never asked why he always carried 2 cups, or why his eyes looked like they held storms he refused to acknowledge. But she noticed things. She always did. She noticed the stiff way he moved when a certain song played on the cafe speakers, as if it reached a place inside him he did not want touched. She noticed the way he positioned the cup precisely in front of her, as if the act meant something deeper than he let on. She noticed how he sometimes paused before approaching her, like he was gathering courage. Kindness was never free. She knew that. Kindness always had a weight. And yet with him it felt different. It felt gentle. It felt like an offering instead of an obligation. And that scared her more than cruelty ever had. She avoided eye contact at first out of habit and fear, but also because looking directly at someone kind made her feel exposed. She kept her sleeves pulled down to hide the marks. She flinched whenever someone raised their voice. She sat with her back to the wall because she hated the feeling of anyone standing behind her. But the cafe slowly became a place where her shoulders stopped tensing every time the door chimed. A place where she breathed a little easier. And he was always there, sometimes with Noah, a little boy who smiled at her with the innocence of someone who had not yet learned how harsh the world could be. Noah gave her a drawing once, a sun with crooked rays and a tiny figure standing beneath it. When she asked who the figure was, he shrugged and said, "You." She had not been in a drawing since 2nd grade, when she sketched her family with stick figures. Because she was too embarrassed to draw the bruises, she kept the drawing in her notebook, pressed between pages like a fragile treasure. And with every morning she watched Elias without letting him know she was watching. His hands were strong but gentle, his movements careful, his face handsome but tired. There was something in his silence, something old, something cracked, but still warm enough to reach her. She wondered what he carried. Everyone carried something. On the morning she asked him that question, she had not planned it. It fell out of her mouth like a truth her heart had been holding for too long. Would you still save someone, even if you failed once? She did not mean to hurt him. She meant to ask if someone broken like her was worth saving at all. But the moment she asked it, she saw his whole body freeze. His eyes darkened like storm clouds gathering. Something inside him shattered. And that frightened her more than any anger could have. She walked home that night, drenched again by rain that never seemed to leave Seattle. She opened her notebook and looked at the entry she had written the first day she met him. The gentleman with 2 coffees. She traced the words with her finger and wondered what his story was. She wondered if she had crossed a line she could not undo. She wondered why it hurt so much that he had looked so wounded. For someone who avoided the world, she found herself returning to him again and again, even when she told herself she should disappear again. But something in her refused to let go of the man with 2 coffees. Not yet. The mornings that followed did not transform quickly or dramatically, but in small, almost imperceptible shifts. The way dawn quietly loosens the grip of night without announcing itself. Elias arrived at the cafe each day at 6:04 carrying his 2 familiar cups of coffee, and each day he found Mara already seated in the corner, as if she too had begun to anchor herself to the ritual they shared. The first morning after her question, he approached cautiously, not knowing what version of her he might find, but she simply nodded, in greeting, her eyes soft but guarded. He placed the cup in front of her, with the same careful motion as always, and stepped back exactly one pace, because he had learned something vital without her ever needing to tell him. She flinched whenever someone stood too close. Her shoulders tightened, her breath slipped shallow. Her eyes darted like she was searching for an exit. So Elias adapted. He placed the cup quietly and then let her have space. It was not sympathy or pity, it was respect. Mara noticed it. She noticed everything about him, even the things he tried to hide. She noticed how he always arrived slightly damp. From the morning mist, his hair still tousled from the wind, as if he rushed out of the house the moment Noah was settled. She noticed how he never touched his second cup until she at least took her first sip, as if the ritual only mattered if she participated in it. She noticed he sat with his back to the door, always watching the room, like a man who had learned to expect both miracles and disasters in equal measure. The mornings unfolded in soft, slow burn rhythms. At first, their exchanges were little more than nods and murmured thank yous, but gradually, the silence between them shifted from awkward to comfortable. One morning, she surprised him by asking something ordinary. "What time do you wake up?" He blinked because no one asked him simple questions anymore. People used to ask him about algorithms, market expansion stocks, and projected revenue streams, but no one asked, "What time do you wake up?" He answered 5:30. "Noah wakes up at 7, so I like having time alone first." She nodded, as if storing that detail somewhere safe. The next morning she asked another question. "Do you like this cafe?" He hesitated, then answered, "I like the quiet." She smiled, a tiny, barely there thing, but he noticed because he noticed everything she did too. She never smiled with her teeth, only with her eyes slightly softening, as if smiling had once led to something painful. Noah grew fond of her quickly. Children are better at seeing souls than adults. And Noah saw something gentle in Mara, something that reminded him of the nurses who used to bring him apple juice when he stayed late at Elias' office before his father died. One morning he trotted into the cafe, still wearing his dinosaur pajamas beneath his coat, because he had insisted on coming with Elias instead of waiting for school. When he saw Mara, he ran up to her and proudly showed her the small picture he drew on the back of a napkin. It was a sun with crooked rays and a stick figure standing beneath it. She looked at it puzzled. "Who is that?" Noah shrugged. "You." The woman with the morning smile. Mara froze. The morning smile. She had not realized she even had one. She pressed the napkin, gently like it was too precious to bend. Something warm flickered beneath her ribs, a tiny spark trying to become a flame. Elias watched the exchange, feeling something unfamiliar twist inside his chest, a blend of tenderness and fear and ache. He had not expected Noah to connect with her so quickly. He had not expected any of this. One cold Tuesday morning, Mara arrived shivering more violently than usual. Her jacket was thinner than he remembered, and her fingers were stiff, as if the cold had seeped into the bones. She tried to warm her hands around the cup, but failed, and he could not stand watching her tremble. He pulled the soft gray scarf from his coat pocket, the same one he had used the first day, and draped it around her shoulders. She stiffened out of instinct, but then relaxed slowly as she realized it was only him. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded once, not trusting himself to speak. The scarf became a quiet symbol between them, a small gesture of care, repeated morning after morning. Sometimes she arrived wearing it. Sometimes she handed it back to him, neatly folded, saying she would not need it that day. He always put it back into his pocket without comment. Their conversations grew slightly longer sometimes, wandering into small fragments of their pasts, the safe pieces, the ones they could say, without unraveling. She told him she used to love reading medical journals, not because she understood all of it, but because she liked learning how people healed. He told her he once tried to grow basil, but forgot to water it and felt guilty for a week. She laughed softly for the first time since he met her. It was quick, fragile, and almost soundless, but he heard it as clearly as if the whole cafe had gone silent for it. Their connection deepened in dozens of small moments. When she coughed, he wordlessly slid a napkin toward her. When his hands shook from too little sleep, she nudged his cup slightly closer, as if reminding him to breathe. When Noah asked why her hands had so many marks, she tucked them under the table, and Elias gently redirected Noah's attention without letting her feel embarrassed. One morning, while he handed her the coffee, she asked, "Why do you always bring two?" He froze again, a familiar ache rising, but this time he managed to answer, "Because someone once liked to drink hers with me." She nodded quietly, not pushing for more. She never pushed. She understood that some truths lived beneath ice that required patience to thaw, and he noticed that she never pressed a hand to the cup without wrapping both palms around it first, as if savoring the warmth. He also noticed she always folded her napkin into a small square before leaving and always placed it precisely beside the cup, as if it mattered that she left something orderly behind. It was the 4th week of their ritual when she began making eye contact. At first it was accidental, fleeting, but slowly she held it longer. Her eyes were brown, flecked with gold, and carried more exhaustion than any eyes her age should ever hold. But when she looked directly at him, something steadier surfaced, something brave, something that told him she trusted him just enough to let herself be seen. One morning he found her staring out the window, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. He sat across from her without asking permission and waited. She wiped her tears, fast embarrassed. "Sorry, I don't know why I am crying," she whispered. He answered softly, "You do not need a reason." Her breath shook, and she looked at him with a gratitude so raw it made his chest tighten. She told him about seeing a mother and daughter walking outside, and how it reminded her of things she lost. He shared nothing in return, but his silence was gentle, reassuring, and she understood his silence for what it was, a companion, not a wall. Day by day, ritual by ritual, glance by glance, they built something fragile and warm between them, something born from small kindnesses and shared wounds, something that felt like the first hint of morning after too many nights. And yet beneath the warmth, a question still lingered between them, unspoken, hanging like a thread, neither dared tug. Why do you care? Why do I trust you? Why does it hurt when you hurt? In each morning there was a moment always the same, always quiet, when he set the cup down and she touched it, and their eyes met, and something invisible passed between them. Something that neither of them yet dared to name. The first disappearance began not with a dramatic moment, but with a quiet absence. One so subtle that at first Elias thought he had simply arrived too early. The cafe opened at its usual 6:04, the lights flickering on with their familiar hum, the scent of burnt espresso drifting through the air, and the morning fog pressing against the windows in slow, ghostly waves. Elias scanned the room automatically, expecting to find Mara curled in her corner seat, hands wrapped around an empty cup, before he even placed the new one in front of her. But the seat was empty, the chair pushed in neatly, the table wiped clean, as if no one had ever sat there at all. He hesitated only a moment before telling himself she would arrive soon. Maybe the rain slowed her down. Maybe she had found a warmer place to spend the night. He forced himself to breathe steadily as he carried 2 cups of coffee to their usual table, positioning them exactly the same way he always did, one in front of her chair and one in front of his. The steam curled upward slowly, fragile and tentative. He sat down and waited. 5 minutes, 10, 20. The coffee cooled and the warmth in his chest dimmed. He left the cafe uneasy, but trying not to think too much about it. People missed mornings sometimes. People had reasons. He repeated that sentence to himself the way someone repeats a prayer they barely believe in. The second morning, her seat was still empty. He entered the cafe with the same hope as before, but the same hollow expectation too. The door chimed behind him, but she did not follow. He set the cups down anyway and watched the steam lift in thin gray spirals. Noah was with him that day, yawning in oversized pajamas and insisting he wanted to bring Mara a drawing. He made a lopsided house with a bright yellow sun and a tiny figure waving from the window. Noah asked loudly, "Where is the morning lady?" Elias' heart clenched, but he kept his voice even. "Maybe she is running late." Noah frowned as if that explanation offended him. People should not miss morning. Morning is important. Elias wished he could argue with that logic because it was painfully true. After dropping Noah at school, he walked to the nearest shelter, a place he knew she sometimes went when the weather grew too cold. The woman at the check-in desk glanced over her clipboard and shook her head. No Mara, no one matching her description. He asked gently if anyone else might know. They told him they had not seen her for days. His stomach tightened. He walked to the second shelter, the one by the river, where volunteers handed out blankets. They had not seen her either. He walked to the park, where he found her once asleep, under a tree, trying to shield herself from the rain. Empty. He walked to the bus station, the church, the alley behind the cafe. Nothing. Everywhere he turned, he found nothing but the echo of her absence. By that evening, he felt a cold panic pressing against his ribs. He told himself it was irrational. She was a stranger, a woman he barely knew. He had no right to feel this fearful. And yet he did. Because she was not just a stranger. She was the person who had looked at him with eyes that recognized something in him that no one else had seen in years. She was the woman who had asked a question that opened a wound he had not touched since Lila died. She was the woman he brought coffee to every morning, because for reasons he did not fully understand, she mattered. On the third day, he tried to be logical. He woke up early, brewed the 2 mugs in his kitchen, and stared at them long enough for the steam to fade. He placed the mugs in the sink, but it felt wrong. It felt like breaking a promise he never said aloud. He walked to the cafe through the cold wind, letting the air bite at his skin because he deserved to feel something sharp. The seat was still empty. He placed the cups down anyway. He waited. He did not touch his coffee. He waited until the steam disappeared, then waited until it cooled, then waited until the silence felt too loud to bear. Becca the barista watched him with a sympathetic frown. Maybe she found somewhere else to go, she offered. Her tone was kind but dismissive, the way people speak when they think they are offering comfort. Maybe she is fine. Maybe she moved on. Elias' jaw clenched. Maybe he repeated, but the word tasted wrong. Tony, the morning cook, leaned over the counter smirking. Or maybe the drifter finally froze to death. Elias snapped, "Shut up." The cafe fell silent. Even the espresso machine seemed to hesitate. Tony's eyes widened in shock. No one had ever heard Elias raise his voice. Not once. Not even when customers yelled, or when deliveries went wrong, or when Noah threw a tantrum. Becca put a hand on his arm gently. "Hey, Eli, it's okay. She will probably show up tomorrow." But the fourth morning came and the seat stayed empty. He brought the coffee again, set it down, watched it cool. He told Noah she was not feeling well when the little boy asked again and again where the morning lady went. Noah bit his lip, then climbed onto Elias' lap and whispered, "Is she sad?" Elias could not answer, because the truth was he did not know. And the not knowing felt like standing on the edge of a cliff with no rail and no warning. On the fifth day, he woke up before his alarm with a knot in his stomach so tight it made his breath catch. He brewed 2 cups almost mechanically, then poured them into disposable cups, adding the lids with trembling hands. He walked to the cafe. The table waited. He placed the cups down. One for her. One for him. He sat and waited. This time it hurt more than he expected. The worry had settled into his bones, a dull throb beneath every heartbeat. Becca approached quietly. "Eli," she murmured gently, "you cannot save everyone." Her voice was soft, not cruel, but it cut him anyway. "You can barely take care of yourself sometimes. You take on too much. You feel too much. It is not your job to fix people." He shook his head. "It is not about fixing. Then what is it about?" He did not answer, because he did not know how to explain that kindness was not something he chose. It was something that spilled out of him even when he tried to hold it back. It was the only way he knew how to exist without drowning. He left the cafe early that day and walked through the rain-soaked streets, searching again. He searched the library, the abandoned parking lot, the back steps behind the bakery. He searched until his shoes were soaked through and his jacket clung heavily to his skin. He searched until twilight turned the sky purple and the streetlights flickered on. He searched until he was too tired to think. When he finally returned home, Noah ran to him, arms open, asking, "Did you find her?" Elias knelt and hugged him tightly. "No, buddy, not yet." Noah looked up at him with wide, sad eyes. "Maybe she is lost." The words hit him harder than they should have because he realized something painful and undeniable. Mara disappearing felt like losing someone again, like failing again, like a familiar ghost reaching into his chest and squeezing the air out of him. That night he sat at the kitchen table, long after Noah fell asleep, staring at the 2 ceramic mugs he never used anymore. He reached out, touched the chipped rim, and whispered into the empty room, "I do not want to fail anyone again." On the 6th morning, he brewed the coffee again, his hands shaking slightly. He carried the cups to the cafe again, put them on the table again, and waited again. The cafe door chimed. His heart lurched, but it was not her, and not her the next time it chimed, or the next, or the next. He watched the steam fade from both cups until there was nothing left. The room around him felt hollow. The world outside felt gray, and he realized with a heavy sinking certainty that caring about someone was always a risk. and letting someone into your ritual was always a gamble. But he also realized something even sharper. He missed her. He missed her in a way that frightened him, because missing someone meant they mattered, and mattering meant losing them could break something in him again. Mara returned on a Wednesday morning so quietly that for a second Elias thought she was a mirage, projected by exhaustion and too many sleepless nights. The cafe door chimed softly at 6:31, and he did not even look up at first because he had forced himself to stop reacting every time. But then he felt something shift in the air, a faint tension, an almost imperceptible pause in the room. And when he finally lifted his eyes, she was there standing just inside the doorway, like someone who was not sure she was allowed to come in. She looked smaller than he remembered, thinner. Her clothes hung off her frame in a way that made his stomach twist, and her hair was pulled into a messy knot that failed to hide the strands sticking to her cheeks. She clutched the strap of her backpack so tightly, her knuckles turned white, and her eyes were ringed with dark shadows as if she had not slept in days. There was a faint purple bruise along her jaw, partly hidden under her hair, and his breath caught painfully in his throat. He stood up too quickly, almost knocking over his chair, and Mara flinched at the sound, a tiny, involuntary flinch that stabbed something deep inside him. He froze immediately, keeping his distance, even though every instinct in him screamed to go to her. For a moment they just stared at each other across the room, two people carrying different kinds of pain that somehow looked the same. Then Mara whispered a word, so fragile it felt like it could break apart. "Hi." His voice cracked when he answered, "Hi, Mara." She swallowed hard, then walked toward the table, but each step looked hesitant, like the ground might vanish if she put too much weight on it. When she reached him, she stopped just short of the chair and lowered her eyes. "I did not know if I should come back," she murmured. "I did not know if I was still welcome." Elias' chest tightened sharply. "Of course you are." She lifted her gaze slowly as if afraid of what she might find in his expression, but the moment her eyes met his, he saw the crack beneath them, the exhaustion, the fear, the shame, the something she had been carrying alone. His hands trembled slightly as he gestured to the chair. "Sit if you want." She did, but she looked like someone bracing for bad news. The silence that followed was thick, tense, filled with things neither of them knew how to say. Finally, she whispered, "Why did you stop talking to me?" The words hit him like a blow, because they carried hurt, not anger, and it was the hurt that tore him open. "I did not stop talking," he said softly. "Or I did not mean to." Mara shook her head, staring at the edge of the table. "You did. That morning after I asked you the question, you looked at me like I said something awful. You pulled away. You stopped meeting my eyes. You left early." Her voice wavered. "I thought I made you uncomfortable. I thought I pushed too far." His pulse stuttered painfully. He wanted to explain everything, the memories, the panic, the way the question had ripped open a wound he had spent years avoiding, but the words tangled in his throat. I reacted badly. It was my fault." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "I thought maybe you saw what I was." "And what is that?" She hesitated, then said quietly, "Too much trouble." Elias shook his head almost violently. "No, that is not true." Mara looked unconvinced. She reached into her backpack with shaky fingers and pulled out her beaten, soft-edged notebook, the Book of Small Kindnesses. She placed it on the table between them like an offering or maybe a confession. The cover was bent, the corners frayed, the pages inside warped slightly from moisture or maybe tears. She opened it to a marked page and turned it toward him. He leaned closer and felt a strange tightness in his chest when he saw the words, Number 14, the man with 2 coffees. Underneath she had written, He always sets 1 cup down like it belongs to someone. I think maybe it belongs to a memory he cannot put down. Elias stared at the page, unable to breathe. The handwriting was small, a little uneven, but sincere, painfully sincere. Mara looked at him, and he realized her eyes were shimmering. I did not disappear because of you, she whispered. I left because the shelter closed for a few nights. There was an incident, a fight. Some people got hurt. They shut the building. I tried the church, but it was full. I ended up sleeping outside near the docks. That is how. She touched her jaw, gently wincing at the bruise. Wrong place, wrong time. Someone grabbed my bag. I fell. I did not even have money for the bus to get here. I walked across the city for hours this morning because I wanted to tell you. Her voice broke, and she looked away ashamed. I did not want you to think I just abandoned the routine. The routine, he repeated softly. She nodded, still not facing him. The 2 coffees, the mornings, the little moments. They meant something to me. They made me feel seen. And when you stopped talking after my question, I thought I ruined it. He felt something twist inside him, a blend of regret, guilt, tenderness, and an ache he could not name. Mara, he said slowly, her name catching slightly on emotion. You did not ruin anything. I let something from my past get in the way. Her eyes flicked up at him. The question. He nodded. It reminded me of someone I lost, someone I failed. Mara exhaled shakily. I was not asking about your past. I was asking about me. Her voice cracked. If someone broken like me still deserves to be saved. The truth hit him harder than anything else she had said. She was not asking to hurt him. She was asking because she was hurting. And he had not seen it. Elias' chest tightened almost painfully. You do deserve to be saved, he said, his voice rough. She looked startled, like he had spoken a language she barely recognized. He added gently, You deserve more than just being saved. You deserve safety, warmth, consistency, a chance to breathe. Her shoulders trembled. Elias noticed then the small details he had missed before. The tiny cuts along her palms, the faint tremor in her fingers, the way she kept glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to follow her. Fear lived in her bones, and she carried it alone. And he hated that she thought he had abandoned her, hated even more that his own fear had added to hers. Slowly, carefully, he slid the coffee cup toward her, the one he always placed at her seat, the steam lifting in a thin, fragile curl. For a second, Mara just stared at it. Then she whispered, You still made 2. I always will, he said softly before he could stop himself. Her breath caught. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Mara closed her notebook gently, smoothing the page, before tucking it back into her backpack. She looked at him with eyes still bruised by exhaustion, but a little less empty than when she walked in. Thank you for not giving up on me, she whispered. He shook his head. I should be the one saying that. The tension between them softened, replaced by something tentative, warm, fragile, but real. And for the first time since she disappeared, he felt the air in his lungs expand fully. Mara reached for the cup, her fingers brushing the warm cardboard. A tiny smile, barely there, flickered across her lips. The smallest smile. But after days of fear and silence, it felt like sunrise. The night she asked for answers did not begin with thunder or drama. but with a thin, steady rain that made the Seattle streets shine like glass and filled the air with the smell of wet concrete and cold wind. Elias had just finished putting Noah to bed after reading the boy his favorite story for the third time, when something tugged at him, a quiet, instinctive pull that made him glance toward the window. The rain looked heavier than usual, drifting sideways in silver streaks, and the dim streetlight outside flickered weakly as if struggling to stay alive. He tried to push away the strange unease settling in his chest, but it lingered persistent. As he walked into the kitchen to pour a glass of water, he saw them again, the two ceramic mugs sitting side by side on the counter, like twin ghosts, one chipped, one perfect, symbols of promises kept and broken. He touched the cracked one lightly, the way someone touches a scar that still aches. Then, for reasons he could not name, he shrugged on his jacket and stepped outside, letting the cold air slap against his face. Something told him he needed to be somewhere, even if he did not know where. He walked without purpose until he found himself near the cafe, its windows dark, the chairs stacked inside the door locked. Then he saw her. Mara stood under the awning, hunched into her thin coat, water dripping from her hair, soaking into the frayed fabric at her shoulders. She held her backpack against her chest as if for protection, and stared down at the sidewalk as though she was afraid to be seen. She looked so small under the dim flickering light that his heart twisted sharply. "Mara," he called gently. Her head jerked up, and for a moment relief flashed across her face, but almost immediately it faded, replaced by something heavier. "I was hoping you would come." Her voice trembled more than the rain. He took a hesitant step forward, making sure not to startle her. "Why are you out here? You could have called, knocked." "Anything." Mara shook her head, water flinging from her hair. "I did not want to bother you. I needed to see you." Elias' chest tightened. He had spent days terrified by her absence, nights replaying what he should have said, mornings staring at empty chairs. But seeing her here, soaked cold shivering, looking like hope and fear tangled together, it stirred something deeper than worry. It stirred something like protectiveness. "What is wrong, Mara?" Her breath came out uneven, a puff of white in the cold air. "I need to ask you something. Not the question from before. Another one. A harder one." He nodded slowly. "I am listening." She hugged her backpack tighter, pressing it to her ribs like armor before whispering, "If you are helping me, because I remind you of someone, just tell me." The words hit him like a punch, straight to the chest. She said them softly, almost gently, but the impact was devastating. For a second, he stopped breathing, the rain pounding around them, filling the silence with a constant hiss. Mara looked away, as if afraid to face his reaction. "I keep thinking maybe there was someone else. Someone you could not save. Someone I look like or sound like or walk like. Someone who left a hole in you." Her voice wavered painfully. "And if that is why you show up for me every morning, I need to know. I need to know if I am real to you or just an echo." Elias felt the ground tilt beneath him, because the question was not just familiar, it was identical. Word for word identical to the question Lila had asked him the night before she died. He felt it all crash over him at once. The hospital room, the beeping monitors, the sterile white walls, the faint smell of antiseptic, the too quiet whisper of his fiancée lying in a bed she would never rise from. He saw her small, trembling smile as she asked, "Am I the reason you keep showing up? or just a reminder of what you already lost? He had not answered her that night. He had frozen caught between grief and fear and guilt, and before he found the words, she had closed her eyes and slipped away. The memory slammed into him with brutal force. His breath cracked, his hands shook. Mara waited unaware that she had stepped into the deepest wound he carried, the wound that never healed, the wound he never touched. Elias turned away, suddenly pressing a hand to his forehead, as if the rain could cool the fire burning behind his eyes. Mara flinched at his movement, misunderstanding his retreat. "I knew it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I knew I should not have asked. I ruin things. People always leave when I ask too much." Elias sucked in a sharp breath. "That is not it." "Then what is it?" she cried quietly. "Why does it hurt you when I ask? Why do you shut down every time I try to understand you? Why do I feel like I am walking through your past without meaning to?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was drowning in memories, in guilt, in the unbearable truth that her question had unlocked a door he had nailed shut for years. He tried again to speak, but the rain filled the silence, drowning his voice with its relentless rhythm. Mara stepped back, her shoulders curling inward. "I thought coming here tonight might make things clearer," she whispered. "I thought maybe you would tell me I mattered. I thought maybe the morning coffees meant something more than routine." Her voice cracked on the word routine, as if the syllables themselves hurt. "But if I am just convenient for your guilt, for whatever you lost, then tell me. I have survived worse." She had not. She thought she had, but she had not. He wanted to tell her she mattered desperately, undeniably, unbearably. But the memory of letting someone die without hearing the words they needed froze his voice again. He took too long to answer. Mara's face crumpled, the hope in her eyes extinguishing like a candle in rain. She whispered, "I am sorry for bothering you," then turned away, moving quickly down the sidewalk. Her thin coat soaked through the rain, hammering her shoulders. Elias reached out instinctively. Mara waited, but she had already disappeared into the darkness, her silhouette swallowed by fog and streetlight. Something snapped inside him, a sharp break like a bone, fracturing under too much pressure. He ran after her, but the rain was thick, blurring everything, and she turned a corner before he could catch up. When he finally reached the corner, she was gone. Only her notebook remained, lying half in the gutter, half on the sidewalk, as if dropped in the rush to escape his silence. He picked it up slowly, rain streaking the cover. He whispered her name into the night, but the city swallowed the sound whole. And for the second time in his life, Elias realized silence can break a heart louder than any scream. Elias barely slept that night. He sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, with Mara's soaked notebook lying in front of him, its warped pages drying slowly under the dim light. Every time he blinked, he saw her face in the rain, the way her expression had fallen when he failed to speak, the way she had clutched her backpack like a shield before disappearing into the fog. The silence between them had cut deeper than any argument could have, and now the notebook sat accusingly on his table, a reminder of every word he had not said. Around 3 a.m, when the rain finally softened into a faint drizzle, he opened the notebook carefully. The pages were filled with Mara's handwriting, small, uneven, but full of earnestness. He found lists of kind acts people had shown her over the years. A stranger sharing an umbrella, a bus driver who let her ride for free, a woman who gave her a granola bar at the shelter, a bookstore employee who let her warm her hands on the counter heater for a few minutes. Each act was numbered, labeled, described in simple phrases like, "Someone cared," "Someone noticed," "Someone saw me." His chest tightened painfully. She had been collecting kindness the way others collect memories, clinging to the smallest gestures as if they were lifelines keeping her afloat. He flipped through page after page until he reached the last one. It was blank, except for a sentence written in faint pencil near the top. Number 28. The man who brings 2 coffees but carries the weight of a lifetime. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those words press against every aching part of him. She had not asked her question to hurt him. She had asked it because kindness meant something to her, something fragile and rare, and she feared she did not deserve it. He realized then, with a clarity that made him exhale shakily, that he had misunderstood everything. Her question had never been about Lila. It had never been meant as a wound to reopen his grief. It had been about her worth, about her fear that kindness from someone like him was temporary, conditional, or borrowed from someone he had loved before. And he had failed to see that. By the time the sky began to lighten, he had made his decision. He needed to find her not tomorrow, not later, not when he felt ready, but now when the truth still clung to the edges of his thoughts, raw and unfiltered. He woke Noah early, telling him there was somewhere they needed to go. Noah rubbed his eyes sleepily, but nodded without complaint. He liked Mara. He wanted to see her. As they walked through the damp streets, the air cold but quiet, Elias replayed the night before, over and over the way. Her voice had cracked when she said, "If I am just an echo, then tell me." He had let her walk away with that belief. The guilt gnawed at him. The shelters were the first places he checked. The first one had reopened that morning, lights on volunteers bustling around, cleaning tables and preparing breakfast. He asked if anyone had seen Mara. The volunteer, a middle-aged woman with bright, tired eyes, recognized her description immediately. She was here a few minutes ago, she said, but she left, looked upset, but she did not say why. Elias felt hope rise slightly. Did she say where she was going? The woman shook her head, but she left something on the table. She handed him a small slip of paper torn from the corner of a notebook. 4 words were written in Mara's handwriting. "I should disappear quietly." His breath caught. Noah tugged his sleeve. "Did she leave because she is mad at you?" Elias swallowed hard. "Nobody. She left because she thinks she does not matter. But she does, more than she knows." They checked the second shelter next, but it was full and no one had seen her. They checked the church, but the doors were locked until evening. They checked the cafe, even though he knew she would not be there. By noon, he felt the fear in his chest hardening into panic. He called a few contacts he had made through charity initiatives, people who worked in outreach programs, and street assistants. No one had seen her. No one knew where she might have gone. As afternoon faded toward evening, Elias and Noah walked near the waterfront. The sky a muted gray, the smell of salt water drifting through the air. Noah held his hand tightly, asking every few minutes, "Will we find her?" Elias answered yes each time, even though the word felt fragile. They were about to turn back when Noah pointed suddenly toward a small covered seating area near the pier benches, sheltered under a slanted roof to protect from the rain. "Dad, look." There, sitting alone on the far bench, was Mara Nees, pulled to her chest backpack, in her lap hair blowing slightly in the cold wind. She looked like someone suspended in a moment between staying and leaving, between hope and surrender. Elias' breath left him in a rush. He turned to Noah softly. "Stay here, okay? I will be right over there." Noah nodded, watching him with wide, worried eyes. Elias approached slowly, making sure his footsteps were loud enough not to startle her. Mara stiffened but did not look up. He stopped a few feet away, giving her space. "You left your notebook at the cafe last night," he said quietly, holding it out. She finally lifted her gaze. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, and it was obvious she had been crying for hours. "I know," she whispered. "I dropped it." "You ran away," he said gently. "I was scared of me, of what you were trying to tell me, of what I thought it meant to you." Elias sat on the bench across from her, not too close but close enough for her to hear him over the wind. "What did you think it meant?" Mara hesitated, then exhaled shakily. "I thought maybe I was asking too much. I thought maybe I was just someone you used to fill a space, someone else left behind. I thought I was a mistake in your routine, something you would eventually correct." The words pierced him. "No," he whispered fiercely. "No, Mara, that is not what you are. You matter. You matter in ways I did not expect, in ways that scare me sometimes because losing someone once already broke me, and I did not want to feel that again." Mara stared at him stunned. "You are afraid of losing me?" He nodded slowly. "I think I have been since the day you showed up shaking and cold, and still trying to smile." Mara blinked rapidly as tears spilled down her cheek. She wiped it quickly as if apologizing for it. Elias continued, his voice soft but steady. "That question you asked me, the one that hurt me. It reminded me of someone I loved, someone I lost. And I panicked, I shut down. But you were never a replacement for her, ever. You are you. You are the woman who keeps track of tiny kindnesses, because life has not given her many. You are the woman who apologizes for needing things she deserves. You are the woman who thinks she should disappear quietly." Mara flinched at hearing her own words repeated back. Elias leaned forward slightly. "But I need you to understand something. You do not have to disappear, not from me, not from this city, not from your own life. You deserve to be here. You deserve to ask questions. You deserve answers." Mara swallowed hard. "Then answer me now. Not about your past, about me. Why did you come looking for me?" The truth rose in him, simple, clear, undeniable. "Because your question was never about hurting me. It was about saving you. And I will not fail you the way I failed before." Her breath caught. She looked down at her hands, trembling slightly. Then she said something so quiet he almost missed it. "I was not asking if you failed someone else. I was asking if someone like me, someone broken, someone who keeps losing things, someone who cannot promise anything back, still deserves to be saved." Elias' heart cracked open. "Mara," he said softly, "you deserve everything." Her shoulders collapsed as if a weight slid off them. She looked up at him, eyes shining with a fragile kind of hope. He held out the notebook gently. She took it slowly, brushing his fingers lightly. The touch was brief but electric. He whispered, "I am here. I am not leaving. Not unless you tell me to." Mara pressed the notebook to her chest. Then, for the first time since he met her, she whispered, "I do not want you to leave." The confession hung in the air, warm and trembling, and Elias felt something inside him shift the same place that once held grief, now making space for something else. Something fragile, something new, something that felt like the beginning of healing for both of them. The night he almost lost her began with a silence so wrong that Elias felt it before he understood it. It was the kind of silence that sinks into a city after a sudden disturbance, the kind that makes even the air feel tight. He had spent the entire day checking on Mara, making sure she got to the clinic for her first shift, filling out paperwork. Standing behind her in line, just close enough so she would not feel alone, but far enough not to overwhelm her. She had smiled shyly at Noah when the boy handed her a new drawing, a sun with arms that he insisted looked exactly like her, and she had even laughed a small soft laugh that made something warm bloom in Elias' chest. When he walked her back to the shelter afterward, she had squeezed his hand for a second, a single fleeting touch that felt like a promise, and then she disappeared behind the doors with a tired but hopeful smile. That was at 5:30. At 8:42, everything changed. He was washing dishes while Noah told him about school and monsters under the playground bridge. When his phone buzzed on the counter, unknown caller, he almost ignored it until he heard a distant noise. Behind the voice on the line shouting chaos movement, a volunteer from the shelter spoke fast, breathless. "Sir, you know Mara Collins, right?" "Yes," Elias said instantly, his chest tightening. "What happened?" "There was a disturbance," she said, voice shaking. "Someone tried to break in. Some of the residents panicked. There was a fight outside. The police came. For safety, we evacuated the building. We tried to account for everyone, but—" She hesitated. "But what? She never made it to the evacuation point, and we cannot find her anywhere." Elias dropped the dish he was holding, the crash echoing through the kitchen, making Noah jump. "What do you mean you cannot find her? Did she leave? Did someone take her?" The volunteer lowered her voice. "They shut down the shelter for the night. No one is allowed back inside. She might be out there alone." The call ended, but the panic bloomed full force. Noah stared at him, eyes wide. "What is wrong, Dad?" Elias felt the old terror rise. The same terror he had carried the night he lost Lila, the terror of being too late. He knelt in front of Noah, gripping his shoulders gently. "I need you to listen, buddy. We have to find someone. We have to find Mara right now." Noah nodded instantly, as if understanding the urgency. The city felt colder than usual when they stepped outside, a sharp chill cutting through the air. Rain began again, light at first, then heavier. Elias carried 2 coffees almost without thinking, one in each hand, lids pressed tight so they would not spill. Noah held onto the back of his coat, running to keep up. They reached the shelter within minutes, lights off, doors locked, police tape fluttering in the wind. A few people lingered under the awning, wrapped in blankets, waiting for transport. But Mara was not among them. Elias called her name. No answer. He asked the officers. No one had seen her. He checked under the stairwell behind the building, around the corner near the dumpsters, near the alley where she sometimes sat to write when she needed quiet. Nothing. Each empty place tightened the fear around his throat. "She is out there," Noah whispered, trembling. "She is cold. We have to find her." "We will," Elias said, though his voice cracked. They searched systematically the way he had once searched for Lila Blanket, in hand trying to warm the dying girl he could not save. The memory clawed at him, but he pushed it down and kept walking. They checked the park. Empty. They checked the warehouse district. Empty. They checked the bus stop where she sometimes slept before sunrise. Empty. They checked the overpass where the homeless community sometimes camped. A man sitting near a cardboard fire told them he had seen a girl with dark hair and a backpack heading toward the waterfront, maybe an hour earlier, looking dizzy cold, not steady on her feet. Elias' heart lurched. "Thank you," he muttered, then grabbed Noah's hand and ran. The wind whipped harder as they reached the waterfront waves, crashing loudly. The sky a dark sheet of storm. The pier lights flickered in the distance. He called her name repeatedly, his voice hoarse but swallowed by wind. Mara, Mara, nothing. The fear that had haunted him for years returned full force. The fear of losing someone he cared about, the fear of arriving too late again, the fear of holding a fading life in his arms. Noah tugged his sleeve, suddenly pointing. "Dad, look." Under the slanted roof near the pier beside a bench, the same place where they found her before something small moved. Elias' heart slammed against his ribs. He sprinted forward, the coffees sloshing in his hands, rain hitting his face like needles. As he got closer, he saw her. Mara lay curled on the wooden bench, knees tucked toward her chest backpack, pulled half under her head as a makeshift pillow. Her hair was soaked, plastered to her skin. Her lips were pale, almost blue. She was shivering uncontrollably, even in sleep, her breath shallow, uneven. Elias felt something inside him crack open violently. "Mara," he whispered, dropping to his knees beside her. She did not wake. He set the coffees on the bench and reached out cautiously, touching her shoulder. She flinched, hard eyes snapping open in panic. Before recognition softened her features. "Elias," she choked through trembling lips. "Why are you here?" He swallowed hard, his voice thick. "Why am I here? Because losing you even for one night feels like losing her again." Mara stared at him, stunned, her breath catching. "I did not mean to scare you," she whispered. "I just had nowhere to go. When everyone ran, I tripped. Someone shoved me. I hit my head. I got confused. I could not breathe in the crowd. I ran without thinking. Then I could not feel my hands. I thought maybe I should stay here until morning." She shivered violently. "I was so cold." Elias took off his coat, immediately wrapping it around her shoulders. Noah climbed onto the bench, hugging her gently with his small arms. Mara blinked, tears slipping down her cheeks. Elias brushed them away, his fingers warm against her frozen skin. "You are safe now," he whispered. "I am here. We are here." She leaned into him weakly, and her voice shook. "Why did you come? Why do you care so much?" "Because you matter," he said softly. "Because you are not alone. Because you do not get to disappear from my life again. Not like this. Not ever." The wind howled around them, the storm pulling at their clothes. But in that small space, under the slanted roof, everything stilled. Mara looked at him with something raw and vulnerable. "I thought you might hate me for last night. For the question." Elias shook his head fiercely. "I could never hate you. I was the one who panicked. I was the one who walked away." She touched his arm with trembling fingers. "I thought I was a burden. You are not. You are the opposite of a burden." She leaned her forehead against his shoulder, breathing shakily as Noah held her tighter. Elias wrapped his arms around them both, feeling the trembling in her body, the fragility, the fear, and the courage it had taken for her to survive another night alone. He whispered into her damp hair, "You are safe. I promise." He helped her stand slowly, supporting most of her weight. She stumbled. He steadied her. They walked back toward the city lights as the storm began to ease. And for the first time, Elias felt something shifting inside him. Not just fear, not just grief, but the unmistakable beginning of something that felt like love. The epilogue did not begin with grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but with a quiet morning light that spilled gently across the wooden floor of the small apartment where Mara now stayed, a safe, warm place Elias had secured for her through a community housing program. Though she insisted on signing every paper herself, refusing charity, refusing anything that made her feel like a guest in her own life. The rain had finally stopped after days of relentless storms, leaving the city washed clean, the air cool and sharp, the sky a faint pale blue that promised a rare break in Seattle's gray rhythm. Elias stood at the kitchen counter just as he had every morning for years, but today the ritual felt different, intentional, purposeful. For the first time since Lila died, he reached for 2 ceramic mugs. Not the mismatched disposable cups he used in his loneliest years, but the real ones, the ones he had not touched since that hospital room. He hesitated only a moment before filling them both with warm, fragrant coffee steam, curling gently upward like the beginning of a new story. Noah sat at the table, drawing a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a sun with an enormous smiling face. When Elias set the mugs on the counter, Noah looked up with a grin. "Are you bringing coffee to Mara?" Elias nodded. "She is still sleeping. We had a long night." Noah nodded solemnly, as if he carried the responsibilities of an adult. "She can have my blanket if she is cold." Elias smiled softly and ruffled the boy's hair, whispering, "You already helped more than you know, buddy." When he knocked on Mara's door, she answered slowly, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Hair-messy shirt slipping off one shoulder, looking softer and more fragile than he had ever seen her. Then she smiled shyly, and something inside him shifted again, warm and certain. "Morning," she murmured, voice still raspy. He lifted the mug, "Morning and coffee." Her eyes widened slightly. "You made 2 again?" "Yes," he said quietly. "I will probably keep doing that forever if you let me." She inhaled sharply, and for a moment he thought she might cry, but instead she stepped aside, letting him in. The room was small, but warm blankets folded neatly, notebook resting on the nightstand, a pair of new scrubs hanging on the back of the door for her first official day at the clinic later that week. She held the mug between both hands, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. "Thank you," she whispered, "not just for this, for last night, for finding me, for not leaving." Elias exhaled slowly and said something he had been holding inside for far too long. "I will always come for you." She looked up, eyes shimmering with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Why?" He took a step closer, the air between them charged with something tender and unspoken. "Because you matter. Because you changed my mornings. Because you made me want to show up again." Mara swallowed and glanced down at her mug. "I thought I ruined things that night at the cafe. I thought I broke whatever we were building." Elias moved closer still and gently lifted her chin. "You did not break anything. You asked a question that deserved an answer. I just did not know how to give it then." Her breath trembled. "And now," he said softly, the words steady, sure. "I know that you were never asking about my past. You were asking if you were worth saving. You are. You always were." She blinked rapidly, tears threatening to spill. Elias continued, voice barely above a whisper, "I am sorry I made you doubt that." Mara shook her head. "No, you had your own pain. I stepped into it without knowing. I stepped into yours too," he murmured, "and I do not regret it." There was a long, quiet moment where the world seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them, the warmth of their breath, the soft glow of morning. Then Mara leaned her forehead against his chest, a small, fragile gesture that felt more powerful than any declaration. He wrapped his arms around her, carefully mindful of her bruises, and she softened into him, exhaling shakily, like someone finally allowing themselves to rest. Later after breakfast, after Noah insisted on showing Mara every drawing he ever made, and after she promised to keep the sun one forever, they walked together to the cafe just as they had in the beginning. But this time they walked side by side, shoulder to shoulder, without the shaky distance of strangers carrying secrets. The cafe door chimed warmly when they entered, and Becca froze mid-pour, staring at them in open relief. "Mara, you are back." Mara blushed, tugging at her sleeve. "Yes, I am all right now." Becca's eyes shifted to Elias, and she smirked knowingly. Looks like someone finally said what needed to be said. Elias' ears flushed pink, but he did not protest. He walked to their usual table and set down 2 cups already prepared, with their names written on the sides. Mara in bold, looping handwriting, Elias in smaller, careful strokes. Mara stared at them for a long moment, fingers tracing the letters. She whispered softly, "I never had anything with my name on it growing up. Everything was shared or borrowed or temporary." Elias reached for her hand, letting their fingers brush. "Then let this be the first." Her breath caught and she smiled. The kind of smile that reached her eyes, warming the whole room. Noah climbed onto the booth seat and announced loudly, "We are having coffee together because we are a team." Mara laughed, a sound like sunlight, and nodded. Yes, a team. As they sat down, Elias felt something inside him settle, a steady, quiet certainty. The 2 cups no longer represented loss or guilt or ghosts. They represented beginnings. They represented mornings he looked forward to instead of dreaded. They represented Mara. After they finished their drinks, Elias walked Mara to the clinic for her orientation, staying close enough to reassure her, but far enough to let her walk inside on her own strength. She paused at the door, turning back. "Will you be here after?" He nodded. "Always." She smiled, then stepped inside, shoulders squared, head high, a woman reclaiming her life one moment at a time. When she finished her shift, she ran back out, her eyes, bright cheeks flushed with pride. "I did it," she whispered breathlessly. "They hired me. I start next Monday." Elias laughed, a rare, unguarded sound that surprised even him, and he pulled her gently into a tight, warm hug. "I knew you would." She pressed her cheek to his chest, listening to his heartbeat, her voice soft and trembling. "Thank you for giving me a chance to start over." He kissed the top of her head and whispered, "You gave it to yourself, Mara. I just walked beside you." Over the next weeks, their connection deepened, not rushed, not dramatic, but in small human moments, the way real love grows. They shared breakfasts, walks, long talks about fears and hopes. Mara read her notebook to him, page by page, and together they added new entries, acts of kindness they witnessed or created. Noah adored her. She adored him back. And slowly, Elias found himself thinking less about loss and more about possibility. One morning, months later, Mara entered the cafe to find 2 cups waiting as always. But this time, something was different. Both cups had the same word written beneath their names. Home. She looked up confused until she saw Elias standing behind the counter. His eyes warm, steady, hopeful. He walked toward her slowly, every step deliberate. "Mara," he said, voice low, "you asked me once if someone broken and still deserves to be saved. The answer is yes, always yes, but you did more than that. You saved me too." She inhaled sharply, tears gathering. He held out one cup, the steam curling between them. "If you want, I would like to share every morning with you. Not out of habit, not out of guilt, but out of choice. Out of something real." Her voice shook as she whispered, "Is this?" Elias smiled softly, the kind that made her knees weaken. "A beginning, if you say yes." She let out a trembling breath, stepped closer, placed her hand over his, and whispered the one word he had been waiting for since the first morning he saw her shaking in that cafe corner. "Yes." Noah cheered loudly from behind the counter, earning laughter from everyone. Elias leaned toward her, resting his forehead against hers. And just like that, 2 cups that once symbolized loneliness became a promise. 2 cups, 1 heart, and a future neither of them ever thought they would deserve, but now chose together every single morning. If you reached this moment with your heart beating just a little faster and your chest feeling a little warmer, then this story found you the same way Mara and Elias found each other, slowly, unexpectedly, and exactly when it was needed, and if it touched you even a tiny bit. Please take a moment right now to let the world know you are here by leaving a comment, because your voice, your words, they matter more than you think. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Was it the first morning with the 2 cups of coffee, the night he almost lost her, or the moment she whispered yes in that quiet cafe? I read every comment myself, and I want to hear your heart in your own words. Because this channel, Emma's Stories, exists for people like you, people who still believe in kindness, in second chances, in the beauty of strangers becoming the most important people in our lives. And if you want more stories that heal, more stories that make you breathe deeper, more stories that remind you that love is not loud but patient, steady, and quietly life-changing, then please hit like, because it helps the algorithm show this story to others who need it. Then click subscribe so you never miss the next chapter, the next love, the next redemption. And if you want to support this channel in the simplest, most powerful way, just share this video with one friend or family member, someone who deserves a reminder that kindness still changes lives, that broken people can still build something beautiful, and that love does not wait for perfect timing. It grows in the middle of broken mornings. If you have ever felt invisible, like Mara, or if you have ever carried guilt, like Elias, or if you have ever struggled quietly while trying to be strong for the people you love, like Noah, then please know this. You are not alone, and your story still has chapters ahead. Chapters where you heal. Chapters where you are seen. Chapters where the right people find you and choose you. If today's story gave you even one moment of hope, one moment where you felt understood, then stay with us, because every week we bring you a new journey, a new heartbeat, a new reminder that love in all its forms still wins. I want you to comment the phrase, "I choose kindness." If you believe that one small act can change someone's entire life, just like it did for Mara and Elias, your comment will help push this story forward. Help it travel, help it reach someone who is sitting alone right now. Thinking no one cares, your comment might be the one that finds them. And if you want more emotional, cinematic human stories like this one, with slow burn romance, powerful symbolism, redemptive arcs, single dads, healing women, rediscovering their worth, billionaires choosing humanity over wealth and love that grows gently but unshakably, then please stay close, because this channel is building a community, a family of people who feel deeply, who love deeply, who understand that being soft is not a weakness, it is a strength. Finally, thank you, truly, for listening, for watching, for feeling, for being part of this moment. Your time is valuable, and I never take it for granted. I hope this story made your day better, even just a little. I hope it reminded you that no matter where you are in your own journey, there is still warmth, waiting still, hands reaching, still mornings worth waking up for, and still people worth sharing a cup of coffee with 2 cups, 1 heart. That is how stories begin and how healing continues. Please like, comment, subscribe, and stay for the next story. Because your heart deserves more than one ending.